I'm Taylor Hannah, welcome to Western Perspective. Tonight we revealed the solutions to solve WA's youth unemployment with our exclusive panel on part 3 of our Left Behind series.
Well, I think that we've got to start looking at education systems and what they're delivering and how it works. I think we've got to be a bit more imaginative in terms of our government.
Most of the employment in Australia comes from small business retail, I believe. And if that's the case, then we've got to start supporting small business retail. And that may mean some very tough decisions to be made by the government of its day.
People have to persist, they have to work hard, but I think it also comes down to believe in themselves. Have that strength of character. Mum and Dad need to encourage them, and their family needs to get behind them.
Over the last 2 weeks, the Left Behind series has uncovered a string of issues relating to youth unemployment. We explored the negative social effect of kidults as young adults are struggling to become independent, and the effects of migration and automation on WA youth's job prospects. It's undoubtedly a conversation Western Australia has to have, and tonight, reporter Ivan Leung hosts the exclusive panel discussing the solution for WA's youth unemployment and the way forward.
On part 3 of our special report into youth unemployment, we have an exclusive panel joining us to discuss this matter and the way forward. We've got Professor Ian Cook, and we got the Rail, Tram and Bus Union Western Australia Secretary Craig McKinley, and we've got One Nation WA leader Colin Ticknell. Gentlemen, welcome to the program.
How are you?
Thanks.
Doing well. The first thing is we talk about in part 1, the issue of kidult, that young people couldn't be independent, couldn't go independent because they are left unemployed. Craig, you have a more extensive experience because your son's going through 2 years of on and off different jobs and job skirting around. You as a father must be still having a very hard time going over this.
Well, it's disappointing because we put Curtis in private school and that wasn't cheap. Had extra tuition, and so often he's got a good attitude, a clean-cut young man. So the components of getting a good job are there. So you can only do so much. So it's very disappointing.
So you reckon that the investment that you put into has not given the outcome that needs to be?
Well, that might be a bit sharp, but yes, at this stage, yes.
Okay, so the kidult phenomenon, Colin, what's your solution on that?
Look, it is hard. It is hard for young ones. I was 16 once, and I left school pretty early because I figured out I'd be better off working. Went and sought for a job. I had 3 jobs on the first day. I went and had 3 interviews. First day, got accepted for the whole 3, and I was able to choose the one I want, which was an apprentice at the West Australian newspaper. So it's changed, and so young people today have been told to get a good education, and now they can't find a job even with that great education. So that's very disappointing.
But then it has to be something to, obviously it has something to do with there's a lot of people competing and overseas competition as well.
I've got lots of thoughts on that, but I'll let one of my other panellists have a say.
Okay. Certainly there's competition. I mean, we've got to look at the other thing about which jobs are disappearing, and certainly jobs have been created, they're disappearing, but it's the lower level jobs, it's the entry level jobs that are the problem, and that's sort of where young people tend to come into the workforce. I mean, Colin was talking about the fact that he comes in as an apprentice, or he comes in, we've got to have those opportunities. Without them, they can't get into the workforce and they can't work up.
Kidult is on the rise, according to the McKinley Institute, as we gathered our story. So you as father, of course, you feel the burden. So what is the way forward on this then?
Well, I mean, it's not easy to say because, in part, one of the problems is that rents are really hard to get. They're more expensive. These kids don't have jobs, so it's harder for them to move out. We want them to be independent. We want them to, to just sort of chart their own life and get on and live it. But they can't. They've got to stay at home because they're not having jobs, or they're finding trouble to get into the workforce, and low-level income at this stage, not enough to move out.
So kidult is a major problem at this point for many Australian families as young people struggle to move out. What is the solution? Because obviously, kicking them out is not a good way to go. Colin?
No, you can't kick them out. You're a parent. When you become a father or a mother, whatever, you sort of protect your children. And they make mistakes along the way. But generally you've got to support them. They have a lot of different reasons why. I suppose the solutions are to support them, to encourage them, They need to be brave. It's a tough world out there today, but you've got to encourage them to have a second chance, a third chance, and just keep working hard. Be persistent and be really hard working to try and set up their own future.
Let's talk a bit more current issues, because Ben White, the Treasurer of Western Australia, just announced the youth unemployment rate is now 11.2%, which is down from May 14.1%, and he says that more than 7,000 people found jobs in June. So do you see that things that will improve?
Oh, certainly they're good figures, good numbers. It's good to see improvement. We've always got to be a little bit careful with some of these numbers because we're not sure about participation rates, and sometimes people just give up and pull themselves out. But it's great news, and we want to see greater improvement on those sort of lines.
But still, double digits is still quite horrific to each and every one of you.
Well, look, I think I agree. I mean, we've always got to be a little bit careful about the mathematics. There's the mathematics and there's the tangible outcomes on the street, isn't there? But on face value, certainly a low score is better than a high score.
And behind those figures were what clearly came out was that there's a lot of underemployment, and those figures showed a lot of part-time jobs. They weren't full-time jobs, not as what we would really want. So they're the things you've got to look out for. So one of the first things I learned when I went into Parliament was check the detail. Check the finer detail, and that's the finer detail. For a lot of underemployment.
So let's talk about the other issues. On part 2, if you've watched it, is about automation versus immigration, which one takes young people's jobs. And first, the immigration issue is that the results and the data were pretty mixed, and some were, in fact, quite a few of them were inconclusive until this week. There were some more positive figures, and according to some of the papers from RBA back in April, during a discussion paper by one of the universities, it actually says that migration does bump up wages. Do you believe in that? Because One Nation, to a certain extent, I won't say it's against migrants, but it is against too much immigration coming into this country.
Yeah, look, we're not against migrants. I'm a migrant myself, and so are my other members. I think the most important thing to remember is that it's about having control over your borders. It's about having control about the amount of migrants that come into the country. So that's what we're asking for. We're asking for reduced migration, not just because of youth unemployment and other matters like employment, but because of the lack of infrastructure to cater for these people as they come through. Schools, hospitals, you name it. So it's about getting a bit of control back and about having a plan. We really need to plan for the future, and we need to just slow the numbers down for now until we can get that plan, put in place. I think the thing about employment, if you look at automation and immigrants costing people jobs, there's no doubt that it does in certain circumstances, especially like I said before, in the lower jobs, in the blue-collar work jobs, which have now gone off in general terms to lots of other countries. But we've got to find a way of regenerating manufacturing and other jobs at the blue-collar level to be able to create jobs for those younger people starting off again.
Okay, so Craig, do you believe the notion of immigration takes young people's jobs in your view?
So we can say, does immigration swamp the labour market and puts an unfair burden on it, or does it stimulate the labour market? I think to draw a line through that is it's dangerous to draw a line through that, because some immigrants come in with a lot of consumer cash, others don't have $2 to bless themselves, some are highly educated, some aren't, some go to settle in a different place. It's a very complicated area. So I'm very reluctant to draw a line through that one. I don't think it's one-dimensional by any means.
Okay, but if you have to draw a line, will you draw a line?
No, I wouldn't draw a line. I think it's complex. I really do.
Okay, so what about you?
Well, I think that perhaps what we need to do is focus on the sorts of jobs that, we're talking about young people, and to some extent both immigrants and automation tend to compete for the sorts of, or often compete for those sort of lower level, lower skilled jobs. I think Craig's absolutely right to say we've got to be really careful. Some immigrants are well educated, bring a lot of skills. They've got a skills program to do that. It's, the young people, those entry-level jobs, the ones that don't require having a long experience in workforces or high levels of skills, they're the ones, as I say, I think automation and immigration both tend to sort of go for.
And we'll talk about education in a moment. But first,
Sure.
but of course, to a certain extent, low wage versus high wage. The argument is saying, all right, immigration drive down wages, but then some say, no, immigration actually increase wages. So, what are the consensus amongst you all?
If I was looking at lower wages versus increasing wages, I think it's a complex matter once again. I think there are cases that happens, but it's not clear, it's not precise. I think if you really look at things that we could improve and help younger people get into the marketplace, it is helping smaller business. That's where the question and the answer for me lies. Reducing tax on smaller business. We talked about payroll tax plenty of times. Those sorts of things is when smaller business can employ more young people.
Okay, but Craig, because you're a union man and of course believe in local jobs, there always have an argument that some small businesses can't find talent. They have to source overseas to a certain extent. That kills them when they can't. So, but then other people say, no, hire local people and then train local people. There's been this tussle over and over and over again. Are we over in the chicken and egg question yet?
Well, if you're saying, well, we've just discussed 11.5%, so that says to me there is local young people to do the job. So math says that. But if we're talking, now most of the employment in Australia comes from small business retail, I believe. And if that's the case, then we've got to start supporting small business retail. And that may mean some very tough decisions to be made by the government of its day. And that includes, do we start to tax online shopping and stuff like that? That's going to be very unfavourable, it's the minefield. But perhaps these are decisions we've got to start doing,
What are the policies at this point that you understand based on supporting small businesses and other initiatives that actually create jobs for young people, their first job?
Well, I mean, generally the approach is to sort of reduce taxation and reduce the sorts of burdens on them in the hope that the businesses become more profitable.
Despite the argument that reducing wages doesn't actually drive up employment.
Well, that has the problem. If you reduce wages and the spending power decreases and your economic activity can often decline. So, but I mean, I think that what we're talking about is a lack of sort of training. Yes, what we're seeing in tax cuts, we're seeing sort of attempts to sort of stimulate business, but I think we've got to look on the other side in terms of what the sort of skills they need are and whether our young people have those skills. Okay,
so when it comes to skills, automations, we've talked about time and time again, lower end jobs will be first eliminated. But even during part 2 of our special report on the automation section, we see professional services are going automation and entry-level jobs are disappearing too as well. So it's not just for low-end people, isn't it? For educated people as well. So what are the solutions at this point? You've called for boycott of those of automation. Is that more of an extreme measure?
That is an extreme measure, but we've seen boycotts.
You still stand by that?
We've seen boycotts before and it has worked. I take your mind back to the Montgomery bus boycotts, different set of circumstances. I admit that, but it did work. Maybe we've got to look at the ethics of this. And we've got to make a stand. We've got to stand on a principle.
But is that backward ideas then, isn't it? Theoretically, because Australia has to move forward to a certain extent.
Well, it may be said that, whatever it takes,
Okay, Ian, what do you take?
I think it's sort of, look, too hard to sort of be simplistic around this sort of stuff. I mean, part of me wonders whether at some stage we're actually going to have a question about whether we can keep everyone in jobs. And what sort of level of unemployment is going to have to be acceptable. And, we're not moving to that sort of place. We're tending to get trapped in this, how do we find more jobs? How do we create more jobs? To some extent, as you're saying, in terms of professionalisation, professional endeavours, we're seeing AI is moving through every field. It's changing every form of work and it's taking out certain jobs everywhere. And so, so we've got to be thoughtful about the fact that, if they're disappearing everywhere at almost every level, I think mostly at the lower levels, but at every level, how many people, what level of unemployment are we going to have to live with?
Because you did say that when it comes to progress, Australia is not progressing well into the world of automation. It doesn't have the robots to actually generate that jobs. What kind of robots is that?
Oh, they're just simple sort of low-level AI that we're talking about. But China's the only country that really is investing heavily. I mean, most of the other countries are not looking at robotics and not moving into. So China's setting itself up to be the factory for the world, and we're all just standing around watching.
Although Western Australia has a lower risk of automation, but that's only applied to manufacturing only, according to the Oxford Economics report, because Victoria and South Australia has more manufacturing jobs, but not here in Western Australia. Will you boycott it? Do you believe that boycotting AI machines and shopping malls actually giving young people that first job is actually something that you will stand for and support to do?
I don't think boycotting's the answer. I think the answer is we've got to go back and think about how we got to this stage and where we may have made some mistakes, and then try and right those mistakes. And it won't be done overnight. Even to the fact of saying to our young people that if you can't get the job where where you're trying to currently get into, I think sometimes younger people have been maybe a bit too choosy, and I think I'd like to just broaden their horizons.
But they want to do the stuff that they study. You do understand that?
Yeah, I think they do. I think you need to have a good education in today's life, but education doesn't mean school or university. Education means getting a job and learning on the job sometimes. These days you can go back to uni when you need to go and get a degree after you've already been working 10 or 15 years. We live in a different world, so I can't use yesterday's thoughts process that worked for me. We need to have a new head over this and look at this completely different. I think the big thing for me really is that when we use China as an example where they've gone really forward, you've got to remember that isn't private money. That is government money. That is state money. And so it's highly sponsored by a communist government. So we can't really use their case. We should be looking at America, we should be looking at Western Europe, and we should be looking at countries that are similar in their democracy and the way they run things. And all of them are struggling at the moment. We've seen what Trump's tried to do, and people may not like him for many things that he says, but some of the things that he's done are starting to work for the American people. Now, he sees that as his number one priority, trying to get jobs back in manufacturing and the big unions and getting them back into steel, but also looking at changing things. I'm not saying everything he does is right, but we've got to give him credit where he's had some success, and he has now got more employment for African Americans and Latino Americans. Okay,
so automation, it links closely to education, and is education actually, because we're talking about upskilling, 36% of Australian jobs will be at risk, and people have to upskill if they want to keep their job. Now, that's everybody upskills during their course of work life, including myself. We all have to. But the thing
I'm doing it right now.
It's right now.
Well, on this panel, I'm upskilling myself.
I hope you're enjoying it. When it comes to education, are we basically prepared for the next generation of entry-level jobs? Because it appears the bar's just going to move up. It's not going to go down.
Look, I mean, we're not really prepared because we're not really that clear on what's going to happen, and universities are very much in a conversation around how we can deal with the fact that the work lives are changing, industries are changing, people need skills that we don't even know what they are at this point in time because they need them in the future. So there's a lot of conversation, there's a lot of concern about this sort of thing. It's hard to do it, but and on the other side of it, I think Colin's right about the fact that we've got to be fairly broad in our understanding of education, that schooling and universities is just part of the picture, and we can't keep thinking those sorts of educations are what going to be the answer to finding jobs.
Okay, so do you both believe, or do you three of you believe that the education right now is out of date?
I think the youngsters coming through the system have to think to themselves, okay, I want to go and get a BA, and that's a great thing, I'll never say no to that. But getting a BA in Shakespearean literature or something, is that going to be
giving them jobs?
Giving them jobs. No, but I might want to say, get something else. Go for electrical engineering or whatever they want to do.
But you do understand, as I said, let's go back to the point, young people do want to study what they want to study.
Well, maybe they've got to have another think about that. It's not about an emotional decision, it's got to be a pragmatic decision.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
It's a very important point. I'm reading in the paper just today that some teachers aren't encouraging females to do STEM subjects. Now that's a stereotype. When you're saying, "Oh, that's not made for you."
May I ask where the source is?
Yeah, it was out of the West Australian Today in the editor. I believe the reasons for that is something to do with they call it the ATAR test or something like that, which I don't know a lot about. But when I saw that, it means that they get a higher points if they're not doing STEM subjects. Well, who really cares about higher points? You get an education to get a good job so you can supply, so you can make a living for yourself and your family. That's the ultimate outcome for you.
TAFE and university, do you believe that nowadays the education is really out of date?
Oh, I think some of it certainly is out of date. I mean, people are trying to, stay current and trying to, maintain skills and deliver skills that they think are appropriate for the current workforce. But in general, no, for the most part, I think it's out of date.
Okay, so before we conclude, what is the solution for education then?
Well, I mean, I think the point about Colin's making about education not simply being about sort of, book learning and being about sort of developing as a person. We talked about Kidult, right? Part of the problem with Kidult is we're not seeing the young people developing as full human beings because they're not given the space to do so. So, so I think we've got to sort of be a little more thoughtful about what we think education is, and I think a little less, I suppose, elitist in our sense of what a good job is. And this whole view that if it's a white collar jobs are somehow better than blue collar jobs, and and I think young people are falling into a trap of this idea of I can't say I want to do a job that no one else wants to do because I'll look bad. And I think we've got to start changing our view about what a good job is.
And Colin did mention that young people will end up in a scrapyard for the next 12 years if things don't change now, but change will take time. So that means, unfortunately, some of them will have to be left out.
I think each individual young person has to look at themselves and say, well, what's best for me? I'm not looking at what my best mate's doing or what someone else has told me, even my teacher has told me. People know themselves better than anyone. You need to go your own path. You need to be strong, you need to be courageous, and you need to work hard and you need to be persistent. That is the environment we live in right now. It will change. There will be a better time just around the corner, maybe a year or two or maybe 5 years. But things change and it does go up and down. So you need to exist now and you need to fight hard.
Craig, before we move to conclusion, what about you? What's your view?
Look, I agree. We get away from the elitism. Actually, there's a demand, plumbing, electrical, motor mechanics.
They're all well paid.
They're fairly well paid, obviously, market situation. But they're not going to be climbing under a car and pulling a gearbox out or something is not going to be automated.
Seriously, if they're anything like the first cars I ever had. My EJ Holden was always breaking down.
You still enjoy that moment?
Oh yeah, I mean and how I learned about cars was making mistakes.
Okay, so to conclude about the way forward, right? Put the mistakes and all the other things into the past, move forward. I'll begin with you, Craig. What's your view?
The way forward
for young people.
Most important to the people do not get too despaired. That they keep their mental health, they keep their resolve, and they think of a bright future. What we don't want them is to get despondent. As easy as that is, they've got to protect themselves from being despondent.
What about you, Ian?
Well, I mean, I think that we've got to start looking at education systems and what they're delivering and how it works. I think we've got to be a bit more imaginative in terms of our governments and them thinking about, we're talking about lithium, moving into that sort of industry. To some extent I think government does have a role leading the way and trying to find industries that can develop. I don't know if they're ever going to get a manufacturing sector or anything like it in WA, but I'd certainly like to see a bit more effort and thought around government in terms of what it can do to help to find opportunity.
What about you, Colin?
The way forward is to look at the past and learn from that. I think when my father came out here in 1955 from the UK, he had to go door knocking. He was a fully qualified carpenter. My mum was a nurse. Both of them couldn't get a proper job for about the first 6 months, but they just persisted. They looked at different alternatives. They made a pretty good fist at it, and now the 4 kids and the rest of the family has really gone to the next stage after that. So, I think people have to persist, they have to work hard, but I think it also comes down to believe in themselves. Have that strength of character. Mum and dad need to encourage them, and their family needs to get behind them, and network. Talk to as many people as you can, because all of a sudden opportunities pop out from knowing people.
We're out of time, unfortunately. It's been a great discussion talking to each and every single one of you, and thank you so much for participation on part 1 and part 2, where we explored all the issues. Thanks to political expert Dr. Ian Cook, and also thanks to Craig McKinley from the Rail Tram Bus Union Western Australia, and also thanks to Colin, Ticknell, the leader of One Nation WA. Thank you so much, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And you can watch part 1 and part 2 if you have missed it. That's on our website. It's back to you, Taylor.
And that's our program for this evening. Don't forget to join us next week. Until then, it's back to you, Ivan and Danny.
Thanks, Taylor. This week's main news again. As Papua New Guinea's Prime Minister James Marpee meets with the Australian government, he's urging the government to decide a deadline for ending the offshore processing of asylum seekers on Manus Island. Refugee activists support PNG's cause after the 6th anniversary of the July 19th policy passes. But there are still no solutions being implemented.
And that's our news for this week. We have the latest on our website and Facebook page.
Until next Sunday after 8, have a pleasant evening.
Good night.